Welcome back to the Pitchy and Palscast, here as always with my friend Matt, who hates anime. How are you feeling this week?
Magical. I feel really happy. This is probably the happiest I've felt. I mean, I've watched good movies before, but nothing that's just so feel-good and wholesome and just fun. Just a really fun movie we watched, and it's a weird feeling to have.
Yes, I decided to throw you a bone this week after putting you through the Babadook and its intense moments. I had the idea to do something fun, and this will probably be a little bit of a series before Christmas, and possibly even bleed into Christmas a bit, as I want to look at the works of Jim Henson and his legacy for a bit. And this will be in the build-up to a terrible film from 2018 called The Happy Time Murders. I want to really look at things that the Muppets as a franchise do, things Jim Henson as a creator did, the sorts of boots that you then have to try to fill, and the ways that they have not been. There might be some bleed over here, because at some point we'll probably do the Muppet Christmas Carol, because it's a fun adaptation, and it has a Doctor Who joke in it.
So while we may have watched a really fun, happy, good movie,
it's gonna end in pain.
Yes, it's all in service to something worse.
If I give you treats, it's only so I can get you to be more willing to bear the pain that's coming.
It's the hope that kills you.
Yes. The other idea, I was thinking, racking my brain of, should I just do several Jim Henson-related works first, but I kind of felt like doing The Wizard of Oz. I was just in the mood to watch it, and I wanted to just be a real grouchy old man and complain about those darn modern movies with their computers ruining movies. What I mean by this is, there's a certain value to, because I really don't want to denigrate CG effect systems. What you can do with a green screen and computers now is truly amazing. I've talked before about how beautiful a film like, say, Thor Ragnarok is. Let's think of another good example. There's a film called A Monster Calls, which is a film about grief, and that is also a quite good-looking film. There's lots of good things you can do, but there is very much a movie magic to knowing that everything you are seeing before you was actually physically there. And when you're just seeing the images and just thinking about the story that's happening and the characters, and then realizing that it's all very, very fake, and they've managed to trick you into not caring, there is a real power to that sort of thing. And so, with that in mind, we fired up The Wizard of Oz. This was also kind of a thing of, hey, have you seen this movie before? And if so, how recently? Because it's always kind of fun to test how much people actually remember of this film, since it's a very heavily rebroadcast and rerun film, and that's the way kids tend to see it, is just they happen to be of the generations where you just turn on the television and here's this movie that's playing, or it's just considered such a wholesome white bread film that it's one that parents are generally happy to just let their kids watch.
I'm almost certain that we had the VHS of VHS of some kind, as I remember being able to. I watched it enough that it couldn't have just been, and watched it in such a way that there was no way it could have just been on the reruns, because I'm pretty sure I wanted to watch it. So, so I'm pretty sure it must have been a VHS that I could actually plug in whenever I wanted. I'd seen this movie a few times, but such a long time ago, there were a few little things that I've forgotten. But I was surprised.
Like how it syncs up with Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon?
I definitely forgot that, if I ever knew that.
That's an urban legend, which is wrong.
Oh, okay.
There's this idea that, if you play the album on loop while you're watching the film, lines in the words sync up to lines in the film. And some of the weird bits of musique concrete set Foley coincide with the film's Foley, man? It's a conspiracy, I tell you. Roger Waters, he was all about MGM in 1939.
I don't know how to respond to that.
Well, I mean, you can listen to the recording, and I've probably put either some stuff from Dark Side of the Moon at the start, or Muppet-related music. I haven't decided yet.
Well, I guess that could be a jumping off point for later, because you were telling me as we watched the movie that there were a lot of myths about this movie, mostly about its production, but I guess we're seeing that there's a lot of little things about this movie that are interesting to know. I would say that in terms of had I watched it before, how much I remember. I was surprised by how much I did remember, actually. Most of it was like, yep, I remember this, remember that. So I must have watched it enough times as a child that it really sunk in. There was only a few little scenes that hardly mattered. The
trees with the apples.
Yeah, didn't remember that.
Which is funny, because that's honestly in some ways more relevant than a few of the other ones. It's the one that really establishes that the scarecrow has a brain, as he tricks the trees into throwing apples at them when they refuse to share.
Oh, I actually didn't catch that. I just thought they were being assholes. Well,
they are
assholes, but they were being clever assholes. And I never really understood why they had to be such jerks to these trees when they could have just been like, hello? They could have just been like, well, I'm sorry. Are these, like, important to you? And they, like...
Look, brother, he's shooting.
But yeah, I forgot about that scene, but most of the scenes I remembered, yeah.
Well, in that case, what's the plot to The Wizard of Oz, Matt?
A young girl who lives in Kansas.
A young girl,
yeah.
We gotta get that joke out of the way. Judy Garland's supposed to be playing like a 12-year-old, and she very much looks like a mid-20s woman pretending to be a 12-year-old. But it works!
Yeah, it works so well that I didn't even know that. I just assumed that she was supposed to be like, I don't know, 18, 20, and I could sort of believe that, you know. But yeah, there's a young girl of varying age, depending on how you view it, living in Kansas on a farm.
Actually, I guess I'll say here that this is a film that kids tend to like, and there's this certain poor decision that a lot of producers of commercial content would make, which is things for kids have got to star kids. When really kids want to see things and will tend to relate best to the things which show adults doing stuff so then they can imagine being grown-ups. And this is one of those interesting examples of something where it's so transparently an adult playing a child's role, yet also doesn't really call attention to how young they're supposed to be. It's able to really blur the lines, and I think that's a lot of what makes Judy Garland's Dorothy such a relatable figure to children. Back to the plot.
No, it's a good point, though. I think Dorothy, as a protagonist, actually works really well. She's very easy to root for. She doesn't seem particularly dumb or naive. She's a little, there's some dumbness to her, but she's not. It's not ludicrously so. And she's trying to be brave and resourceful. She's a perfectly fine protagonist for kids or adults, really.
Yep.
So yeah, she's on a farm with her dog Toto. But unfortunately,
that dog went on to record a hot pop song called Africa. Maybe that will open this episode.
I'm gonna sandbag that. She's with her soon to have a very good music career dog, who unfortunately bites a very powerful member of the community who wants to get the dog destroyed, killed, put down. So she runs away and meets a carny who sends her on her way back through a nice bit of trickery. And unfortunately, when she comes back with her dog, a cyclone happens.
A tornado, in fact.
A tornado. You know,
it's Kansas,
an
mate.
extreme weather event occurs.
Well, I mean, like, it's a dry heat-based one rather than a tropical high and low
there's a
air
difference.
pressure situation creating a cyclone.
Which...
And you'd get a hurricane because it's the northern hemisphere. The southern hemisphere has cyclones. They spin the opposite direction due to the Coriolis effect.
Nice scientific knowledge there. And they look fantastic, by the way. Like, I'm taking too long with this plot, but I really have to say that in case we forget
I'm not going to forget.
Looks really, really good. And as this tornado event happens, and as she is thrown around in the house, we think it flies away. Either way, bad things happening. She falls unconscious, and she enters. As she wakes up, she leaves the house and enters a world called Oz, which is full of animals that talk and tin men and lions and
guilds that produce lollipops and lullabies.
Yes, and witches and warlocks. And
this is an isekai film, by the way, everyone.
She murders. Well, she doesn't murder, but her house apparently falls on a witch that is quite evil, which saves a community of munchkins. And in reward for that, the munchkins and a witch that apparently watches over them sends her on a trip to essentially get back home to Kansas. And she on that journey, she makes friends, goes on adventures, and eventually she gets back home. And it's revealed that it might have all been a dream. And I don't want to talk too much more, but I think that's the general plot of the movie.
Time for the ending of the movie explained. Let's get the full-on lore of the interaction between Oz and reality. No.
Yeah, I particularly don't feel like the need to explain too much of the movie because I feel like...
You've probably seen it.
Yes, you've probably seen this movie.
I think one of the great things about the bookends of this film... First of all, there's this interesting thing where if we look at this from like a Joseph Campbell's Hero of a Thousand Faces perspective, one of the key things that a lot of people forget about the monomyth is that when we've returned to the status quo, there's this sense that the hero has now found that the home that they once held is now unrecognizable and they have changed too much. Like, say, the Vault Dweller in Fallout getting rejected by his community would be an easy example that comes to mind. Someone probably mentioned it in the video, and that's why it's sitting in my brain stack or something. It was the Dan Olsen video, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
Yes.
I didn't want to say anything. Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's a good example. What is kind of interesting here is that Dorothy doesn't have that state in this film. It's all about her realizing just how much she loves her home. And indeed, this film is all about never actually go on adventures. You must never leave your local farming community.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No,
I'm going to use that too. I guess I'm going to jump straight into this facet of things. Is that there's a lot, and while we were watching, you were making jokes about, hey, what if this bit was a bit more sinister? What if there's some cruel intentions here? Why does the Wicked Witch of the West not actually do anything menacing? Even when she sets up a straight-up ticking time bomb in the plot, there's no way to know that her turning an hourglass over will actually do anything to Dorothy. It's more like she put on an egg timer to remind herself to go kill the child after she's done doing some other business.
She put like a little note, like if it was like a modern movie, she'd be like, Siri, remind me to kill Dorothy.
Yes.
At a certain time later today.
And there is the great thing about Frank L. Baum's works is that they're all public domain now, which has led to, over the last several decades, reinterpretation of his texts. In particular, there is a novel by... Why do I always forget his name? Gregory Maguire, I think? Let me just double-check that one. Yes, Gregory Maguire wrote Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West, the first in a series of books that he wrote of essentially Oz fanfiction. And you're making some jokes about, like, there being this rich upper class and things popping up like that, and it's actually explicitly about taking that into purely being text. That Oz is this stratified society where there is an upper class abusing a lower class, and this is allowed for systemic racism and the like. And one of the things it sets up is that the witches, all four of them, are actually part of a conspiracy to bring about revolution and make things better. And the Wicked Witch of the West is doing a work. She's running a work shoot where she's pretending to be this great evil just to operate as a force to help construct the narrative of here are the clear-cut villains we need to be removing from our society, and that helps the revolution be achieved. So, like, the reason she doesn't actually do anything menacing to Dorothy when she appears is, like, it's just to give Dorothy impetus to get to her, so she can then fake her own death. And the books are pretty freaking dry, but there is a 2003 musical adaptation of the first book called Wicked. I believe there's a Lindsay Ellis video where she describes it as your mother's favorite musical, because it tones down a lot of the real hard story of revolution, but does keep some of it in order to make it more of this happy, friendly, a bit of a romance story. It turns out the Wicked Witch of the West called Elphaba hooks up with a scarecrow in the end, and there's some romance there and some happy family love as well. And it's a great musical, and the original version featured Elsa from Frozen singing a song that's basically the original Let It Go. I might just start this video with Defying Gravity, because why the hell not?
You seem to have a lot of options today.
I do. Lots of music today.
You should have, like, little breaks, just so you can get them all in.
So there's your trivia. or there's some form of trivia, and, like, that's a note. So, like, there's these ideas floating around in this book, and there's people saying, like, is this actually, like, some big feminist screed and things? Because it was a bit before women's suffrage movement really started to pick up, was when the book was written from memory. I mentioned, and you mentioned, there's a bunch of urban legends. I can't remember them off the top of my head right now.
Oh, sorry,
but there's like stories about, people died during the production of this, and I can't remember which ones actually were people dying, which ones is people not actually dying. From memory, the original actor to play the Tin Man, that one was real. I think that one is a case of the metallic paints they were using to cover him wound up being really unhealthy for him, and he had to pull out. I think that one's true. What is true is that the Wicked Witch of the West, Margaret Hamilton, she was like the second or third choice to play the witch. The original idea, since the witch wasn't actually green in the original book, and they made her green for a similar reason to why the ruby slippers are ruby, not silver slippers. And that is because this film is in Technicolor. And the bookends of the film in Kansas are shot in sepia, which does add to a certain sort of timeless feel to it, even in comparison to monochrome shots. And then when Dorothy walks out into Oz for the first time and it's completely Technicolor, they really wanted to have as many vibrant, striking colours as they could, so they painted Margaret Hamilton green, and they made the slippers red instead of silver, so they can really, really pop out and make you wow. And every time you can see the shoes in a shot, like, they do catch your eye. Anyway, so I can't remember who it was who was originally going to be the actress for the Wicked Witch of the West, but she expected it to be more of a Serene Beauty type of role and decided she didn't like it. And Margaret Hamilton went, I need this role. I am gonna be the witchiest witch to ever witch. And she is having so much fun every time she's on screen.
Just her walking around is fun. Like
this hunched prowl that she has. The angry pointing she does. The way that she manages to convey that even when standing upright in the bookending scenes. And then, here is where we get to other fun production stories. The first time she appears in the Munchkin Land, she teleports in via cloud of smoke, which was achieved by having a trapdoor and a platform push her up underneath the cloud of smoke. And when she leaves in that scene, it's the same location. There's again the cloud of smoke, but it ends with this blast of flame. That's real flame they're using in the same location Margaret Hamilton was. But they didn't want to do, like, say, a Georges Méliès substitution method, where you have the shots, and then you have a different take later where you play the blast the flame. No, she goes down in that contraption and then jumps away as the fires then set off where she was. The contraption moved a bit too short in the final take that's used in the film, so she got second-degree burns from this explosion, and then kept on doing shoots anyway.
The true hero of the movie is actually the one playing the villain, clearly.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just covered how there's an entire musical about that.
Yeah, that's actually cool to know, and it's that thing where, like, now, like, looking back on it, you're respectful of that, and you're also kind of in awe of a woman who was so strong that she could take second-degree burns on her face and keep on going. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't want that to happen ever again. I mean, it's
like any disaster for the craft.
Yeah, it's like this probably wasn't really worth it, but it's good that you kept on going. Like, it's tough to know how to feel. Yeah,
it's that awkward thing whenever there's any sort of bizarre disaster in the story of a production, where ideally you don't want those things to ever happen, but it adds to that art through adversity situation where you're thinking, wow, that's kind of awesome that happened. Jackie Chan just broke both his legs botching a stunt, and it's horrifying, yet also an amazing outtake to watch.
It's like that. It goes to that kind of like myth of how making movies is supposed to be, and it's probably a dangerous one. There's probably ways of making movies right that doesn't result in Jackie Chan breaking his bones or.
And it's the Star Wars prequels. Just do it all on green screens.
Just do it so George Lucas doesn't have to get up while he's reading his coffee. Hopefully there's a midline between getting broken bones and the Star Wars prequels.
But anytime you have any sort of kinetic action going on, there's always going to be some degree of risk.
Yeah.
Though I guess talking about the potential damage of working with carnies allows me to bring up some other note that I was going to bring up while here. And that is some early things about the formation of Hollywood. as the earliest parts of film was, of course, French magicians working out how to make a camera, then another French magician called Georges Méliès purchasing a camera, filming things like Trip to the Moon, just working out all these tricks about how to do special effects with the camera. Thomas Edison acquiring a large pile of these films, making a lot of money from his screenings of those films, paying no royalties to Georges Méliès, so Thomas Edison continued to be rich. Georges Méliès fell into poverty, destroyed most of his films during the First World War in order to get back the silicon and stuff that was needed in them, in the film itself, because people were poor. And the point I'm getting at is, of course, as we've looked at a bunch of German expressionism, how throughout the 10s and the 20s, it's places that aren't America that is really respected for filmmaking. What changes things to a certain extent is the crash of Wall Street and the Great Depression. Results in this large pile of bankers and investors now realizing that they've got no hope in New York, and they all just move across the country trying to find something that they can make money off of. And they all wind up in Los Angeles, which happened to be where a lot of the cameras were starting to pop up. And so there are all these random carnies sneaking into theaters where plays were occurring and just quietly, as surreptitiously as they could, setting up a camera in the back and shooting the plays, and then selling off screenings of those plays that they illegally recorded. And so all these people are sneaking around doing this sort of carny nonsense, and then suddenly all these investors appear and say, hey, maybe we could do something with this. And so Hollywood grows out of this mass injection of money suddenly, but it's all these shonkos just trying to steal each other's ideas and other people's ideas. So this is like the fourth film adaptation of Frank L. Baum's The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Because the first three were produced by more shonky people, just trying to go, hey, here's this thing that's American, I guess we'll just try and make it a movie. And this was the first one to really, really say, you know what, let's go all out and put on an extravaganza with this fantastic, and I mean that fantastic as in the fantasy genre, film, book. Let's just do something visually spectacular that will blow your mind. And so here is what we have.
Are you saying that the original Pirates were actually Hollywood?
Mm-hmm. I sure am, man.
What an interesting... That's what I got out of that.
Capital comes through exploitation.
Well, as for the last section you're talking about, like, I think they definitely succeeded. Like, one of the things that I kept noticing throughout the film was just how wonderfully looking it was.
Yeah.
There was a few things that didn't hold up. There was like sometimes there'd be like an owl that didn't look up, or like a flower that would look pretty plastic, but...
Yeah, and the plastic flowers even work, I feel, for the areas where they're placed. It's just, there's a few fake birds in the forest leading to the Wicked Witch of the West's castle. And since there were actual birds earlier in the film, it's what really pulls you out.
Yeah. It's a shame because it's a tiny scene. I shouldn't really be criticizing too much because otherwise the movie just looks fantastic. Like it's like luscious. Is that a good word maybe for it?
Yes.
It's like very like even the opening and the ending, the sepia looks really, really good. And I was like, wow, I forgot how amazing sepia could look. and then when it hits the Technicolor, it's not like you were talking before about the green of the witch's face and the red of Dorothy's shoes, but that's not the only stuff that...
The yellow brick road is so yellow.
Yeah.
And almost every... the entire film was shot on sets. Tripping over my words quite a bit tonight. This is unfortunate. Yes, the entire film was shot with sets, which means that all the outdoor scenes are using matte paintings. And they're pretty obviously matte paintings if you know what one of those is. But you do not care, because they're so good looking, and they match the way that the actual sets have this certain surreal vibe with all these plastic items floating around.
Yeah, it doesn't need to look realistic.
Yeah.
Like none
it
of the
feels
words,
magical.
Yeah, none of the words we've used to describe how great the movie looks has any kind of word for like realism in it. Like, that's not the point. Like, it looks amazing in like an artistic kind of way.
Yeah.
And as you said, like those matte paintings, like I, and I'm not like an expert on these things, but even I was able to work out like, oh yeah, that's a matte painting. and it didn't matter. Like, it looked fantastic. It worked perfectly with everything else that you were seeing.
Yeah, and again, even when you're seeing in Oz, you go, yeah, that's matte paintings, but all the Kansas scenes are also on set with matte paintings, and they're barely noticeable. Like, it just seems like the way that they've shot, the right angles they've taken, and the emptiness on the matte paintings, it just feels like you're in the plains.
It does show that there is maybe a value in the spectacle of seeing.
The physical.
Yeah.
The real.
Yeah. As I'm not sure what else to really say about the aesthetics of it, other than just like, yeah, it was probably the best part of the movie, actually, just looking at it. Mm-hmm. It was like being in a... I wonder, did they ever make any like theme parks or...
Yeah.
Yeah?
There's been stuff.
Yeah, I'd imagine so, because even as an older person, was like, man, I would love to be walking down this yellow road.
Oh man, I'm thinking, I think this is going to be a real weird point of trivia, now that you brought this up. From memory, there was a Wizard of Oz theme park produced in the mid-90s, and I think one of the lead stakeholders, or possibly even like the CEO who got it who gathered the startup funds to get the initial implementation of it, was Kip Fry. Now, Kip Fry was CEO of World Championship Wrestling in 1993. For about 6 months, he was a lawyer who was working for Turner Broadcasting, who got appointed to that position. And in his time there, a bunch of weird contract negotiations. His idea was to just spend a bunch of money to make everyone involved in the company happy and improve the product quality. And he basically learned a bunch of tricks there into how to be a startup guy. And he spent the rest of his professional career, the next 15, 20-ish years, he spent just going from startup to startup, finding ways to convince people to give that startup money, saying, hey, look at how big the growth is because of all this money we're getting, selling that startup to someone else, and then moving to the next one and making his money this way. I think it must have been 2012-ish. He then switched to some business college where he now gives talks about the ideal ways to monetize startups.
It's an interesting story.
Yeah, I think one of the projects he worked on was a Wizard of Oz theme park at one point. Doing the same thing. Getting in, talking it up big, getting the investments, getting out before it craps out on him.
It seems like it's impossible for us to get away from carnies.
Oh, we can't. And there's more coming in this episode.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we haven't even talked about the actual carny character in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, and I do want to talk about him at some point.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, just I would love to hear what you think of him and how he's supposed to be read, because I mean, when we first meet him, it's in the sepia tones and in the real world, if you want to call it that, where she's running away from home with Toto because she's afraid that the evil woman, the evil witch, is going to have Toto put down. And he acts just like any other carny that you would expect. He's a very tropey, cliche kind of carny kind of guy. He's clearly pretty sketch. He lies with almost every word he says. But then he does something that I think is very different than I've seen from most carnies ever, at least in that kind of general depiction.
He's not like the evil guy from Where Back, A Dinosaur's Tale.
Yeah, he doesn't fleece her for anything. He doesn't get anything from her for his own profit, or he doesn't do anything bad to her just for fun. He actually helps her. You can tell, it's a very charming kind of deception.
Yeah,
that he puts
uses carny tricks to maintain the status quo and actually help her be safe when a twist is about to hit.
Yeah.
I think what I like about him and that scene is a structural thing, is that this is a good film for showing children because it's a good way to introduce kids into comprehending the concept of setups, reminders, and payoffs, as everything in the initial Kansas scene establishes things about the characters you're going to be seeing and the arcs they're going to have. The various actors who are in that are obviously the Wicked Witch of the West, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, and they all do things that very clearly state their issues. Oh, I wish I was more courageous. I wish I was smarter. I wish that I was more compassionate. And these are then reminded through their introductory songs as the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, and then ultimately paid off by the end of the film. And this is a sort of thing, it's not subtle at all, but with a film made for children, this is valuable for just... And I think the generations of children who saw this film, particularly in the TV era, as opposed to, say, a lot of baby boomers who would have been older and may not have seen it as much. Like, this is the sort of thing which gets you to just be used to understanding how to read films as text, without even really thinking about it. That leads into something I was going to mention about the pacing of this film, which is breakneck, in much the same way that, say, a lot of scenes in things like Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. But I think it works here because it's not only so good to look at the whole time, but also I think that's a big part of why you can remember so much of this film, even if it's been decades since you saw it as a child. Because it's continually moving quickly, so a child will keep focused the whole time without being bored, yet also is clear-cut in its structure enough that the ideas are going to be present and remain with a child throughout that whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember thinking, as I was watching it, because I was thinking back to the other older movies that we've seen, like, it does have that kind, like, I remember, especially right at the start, the way characters talk to each other and they rush through their dialogue reminded me a lot of old movies, but I think what this movie does better than a lot of those ones, like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, is a good example. Every scene has a point to it. It might not be a very, like, complex thought or anything like that, but it always has a point to it. And it's always going somewhere with every scene. It doesn't spin its wheels at all. And I think, yeah, you're right. Like, as a child, as an adult, it's actually quite nice. So never mind as a child. So yeah, it's probably one of the movie's better points, that it's able to just keep on moving. Yeah,
this is a 100-minute film, and as an adult, you don't feel like your time's being wasted. And as a child, you're gripped the whole time.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry.
What's your next note, Matt?
Also just like, because the same thing with the Connie with Dorothy early on, then we have him in Oz, where a very similar thing seems to happen. But I'm also not quite sure about, this is probably me getting too far into the nitty-gritty of the movie when it's obviously more of a general idea. But it's interesting to me that, like, it seems like at first he's fleecing them. Or at least, like, he, like, okay, they get to Oz, they get to the wizard, and he says, I will give you the things that you want. And then...
yeah, once you've done your fetch quest.
Yes, once you've done your fetch quest, or just your general quest, then I'll give you the things you want. They come back to him and he says, no, I have to think about it. And then when they realize that the Great Wizard of Oz is just a carny behind a little closet window curtain, then he does that thing which he did early on in the movie where he kind of tricks them into... Like, he uses his carny tricks to...
Enrich their lives.
And obviously, in the beginning, he was just sending her home, but in this way, he was kind of tricking them into thinking that he was giving them something that they already had. And which kind of fits in with what he was doing with Dorothy, but the fact that he didn't just do that straight away is interesting to me. Like, what was the point of the deception in the first place if, as soon as they uncovered the lie, he then just gives them the stuff?
Well, I mean, we could view that as, like, the sort of coward's way out. I think cowardly is the best way to describe the wizard.
Yeah.
Where he's someone who's got some smarts and got some skills, but he's not going to stick his neck out to risk things.
Yeah.
So it's just, oh, well, I don't know how powerful that witch is, so if someone else takes care of it for me, great. If I can then get access to some power, that's neat. Oh, you've exposed me? Well, that's okay. I'll find a way to sweet talk my way out of this. And, like, he's well-intentioned, but ultimately a coward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually a good point. And even in his original scene in Kansas, yes, he does help her out, but he doesn't actually go out into the storm to help her. Like, he sends her home, which is nice, but then he doesn't, as you say, he doesn't stick his neck out to actually make sure she does get home. He's like, that's my good deed, but I'm not actually going to risk myself. All right, yeah. All right, that's the end of that point then. You've helped me understand.
That's the shades of grey.
Which is really good because this movie doesn't have many of those. It was I was talking before that the scenes where how everyone good in this movie is very beautiful and everyone who's bad just looks like a horrible witch person and is horrible. And it's just the movie just has that black and white look on things where especially the scene with the good witch where it's like, how do we know she's good? Well, she's beautiful.
She explicitly states that only bad witches are ugly. And certainly this is something where it's a series of books. And they do further elaborate. This is like just that little glimpse into there being some further complexities that an author could further extrapolate on. We have, like, later fan writings, like I mentioned. There are many more books in the series, which then officially do further expand on and increase the complexity. And, of course, there is the film Return to Oz, which then makes things much more complicated.
Yeah, I actually wanted to talk a little bit about that. I'll just talk about my thoughts on the idea that you have a very simple movie here, and then all these later adaptations, fan works, or stuff like Wicked, trying to extrapolate or trying to have different alternative kind of viewpoints on it. And I'm never quite sure whether, as I said, as you were saying, I was saying many jokes about like things could be more sinister here, and I can never tell whether that kind of joke is funny or whether I'm going for something that's very low hanging, like a very easy joke. And I'm never quite never quite sure whether I should just be more just like lean back about it and just go, this is just what the movie is. Don't be a smartass about it.
It's read the room.
Yeah.
Really. And just acknowledge that there's both of those lenses through which you can be reading the text.
Totally. And I definitely, after watching this again, I obviously knew of the existence of Wicked and of those different alternative fan works, but now I'm actually more interested to see like what they actually did specifically.
Well, are you ready to watch Oz the Great and Powerful with James Franco, a Sam Raimi film directed by Disney? Produced by Disney?
No, I don't. Okay.
Correct answer, Matt. No.
I'll be more specific. I'm interested in more complex and interesting takes on.
But the Wicked Witch of the West is James Franco's jilted lover, who drinks the strength potion and it makes her green.
I'm not going to reply to that.
The Zach Braff monkey gets sad when James Franco lied to him.
Yeah, we're not going to watch that movie.
It might come at some point.
Oh no.
I've got to find something more interesting to discuss it with in relation to than, say, Evil Dead 3. Like, that's a pretty cold take to have because it's so obvious that it's just Sam Raimi was hired to do this thing for Disney because Disney really wants the rights to this film, but MGM still has them. And, Disney wants to have its tendrils in all of culture, and this is the one piece of American culture that it cannot own. So it has to keep making bootlegs of it, and they're bad.
It's like this one little thing. It doesn't even matter that much. When you own everything except for one little thing, that little thing feels like a little thorn in your side. Apparently don't like Disney.
It's always fun to rag on Disney. Again, sometimes you read the room, you gotta grab that low-hanging fruit. Other times, the tree will get mad at you if you do that.
Yeah, then you have to make the tree throw its own fruit at you so you can get it. I only have like one more, and it's only a tiny point. It's just something that I thought was interesting, and because we talked about how breakneck the pace was for this film and how that makes it more engaging. I do think, though, that if you tried to make either this movie or a movie like it nowadays, I do think that you would have to show your main character, in this case it's Dorothy, you'd have to show them a little bit more like uncertain about what kind of scary place they've entered, because it's okay for this movie, you can kind of just get with it, you understand it's got to keep going, and it's a magical, fantastical movie, and it's just how it is.
Yeah,
Dorothy acts how she needs to act.
There's an expectation that the characters must behave in a more realistic and disbelieving way.
Yeah.
And if you do this poor, then you get, say, live-action Beauty and the Beast by Disney.
Yeah.
If you do a better version of it, I think something like Coraline would probably come close. Even though that is a much more macabre story in general.
I wouldn't mind watching Coraline for this podcast.
Oh yeah, like I was thinking of doing that for Halloween.
Oh,
Maybe next year.
missed out, yeah. But yeah, just something I just thought I would say. Like, you wouldn't be able to make. It's probably not that much of a point because, like, obviously you wouldn't be able to make a movie that was made in when was this made exactly? What year?
39 from
39,
memory.
Yeah, that's a long time ago. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to replicate it perfectly these days. So I think audiences would be a bit more like, what?
Yes.
Why is Dorothy acting it? Even I was like that, and I had to like curb down on that kind of.
You have to go, okay, we're actually
it's
being
fine.
this earnest. Actually, that does remind me one last thing on Wizard of Oz specifically. And that is, there is an adaptation of Beauty and the Beast by Jacques Cocteau. It's a very early film, like 1912-ish. And that opens with a text scroll saying, "This is a fantasy story, and we invite you to come along for the ride and just take it for what it is." And this film actually opens with a similar scroll that you might not have noticed. Because I think you were writing notes or something at the time.
Oh, I
but
do remember there was a text scroll, but I don't remember exactly what it
yeah,
said.
it's like saying, hey, it's been like 40 years since this book came out, and we invite you to come along and enjoy the ride.
Huh. That is an interesting disclaimer to have. Like, it's not something that happens very often, but I understand.
Yeah, there's
where
this
it's
base
coming
assumption now that if you're seeing a movie, then you should be coming along for the ride, because it's obviously going to be a work of fiction. And this is something that, like, a CinemaSins type people seem to forget.
from. Maybe they need a text scroll. We'll just
Yes.
have to transplant
Well,
that.
then they'll say, oh, there's words at the start of this movie. Ding.
You can win.
You can't win. Well then.
It's a shame we have another movie because that'd be a great way. You can't win with CinemaSins is not the worst way to end.
So
any
then,
kind of topic.
let's talk about something happier about movies.
Sure.
Muppet Movie The. Directed by James Rawley. Produced by Jim Henson, and with a very heavy creative influence by Jim Henson. This was 1979, about 3 years into The Muppet Show being a thing. So it's around the time where The Muppet Show has worked out how to tell jokes. Like, the first season of The Muppet Show does not hold up. But the second season onwards do. They've worked out how to tell jokes, how to better use their guest stars. I think that's around when, like, the Victor Borgia episode, which is just this genuinely heartwarming and fun episode, or like the Linda Ronstadt one where there's this love triangle between her and Miss Piggy over Kermit. The Paul Simon episode where Gonzo sings a song for Paul Simon, and Paul Simon responds with, "Gonzo, you see this guitar? I will never play a song unless it's your song on this guitar."
Wow.
Then faces the camera and keeps staring at the camera as he destroys his guitar.
Oh, that's nice. I like that.
so we're right there. Jim Henson's fully moved on from being that guy who helped make Sesame Street a thing, and firmly into this wild creator making this madcap vaudeville TV show. And so this movie happens, and he doesn't yet know how to direct a film, which is basically why he isn't the director of this one. They just wanted someone who knew how to get everything together, so he could then learn the ropes. So they got James Rawley, who at that point, I think he'd won an Emmy for some episodes of The Monkees, the TV show that he'd directed. He's pretty much entirely a TV director. And that's exactly the sort of director that you want for this sort of thing, where it's like, you've got some really strong creative voices again. This is the Muppets, so Frank Oz is there as well, trying to learn the ropes. So you want the sort of guy who knows how to just tell people to get in their places and say, okay, actors, you call the shots as far as what your characters are going to do. I'm just here to keep the cameras rolling. And James Rawley, the last thing I can recall him directing was like the first 2 seasons of Grey's Anatomy. So, yeah, just a TV guy.
Just a journeyman.
And he's not even close. He has final billing in the credits. That's how little the director matters in the context of this film.
Which is so crazy compared to most movies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, this film's an interesting one as far as how, like, you apply auteur theory. Is James Rawley an auteur that you can analyze, or is this Jim Henson's film, in truth? Or is this Frank Oz's film, in truth? It's a great example of art being collaborative. Now tell us, what is the Muppet movie, Matt?
Oh, just a general plot?
Yeah, what's the plot of the Muppet movie?
Okay, the basic... Well, there's a framing device of the Muppets are going to watch their own movie right at the start, so I better make sure I get that out there. But the movie starts proper with Kermit in a swamp. I believe it might have been in a Georgian swamp. I once spent a bit of time researching a Georgian swamp called the Okefenokee, which is interesting just because it looked a lot like it, and that's just a little personal anecdote there. Either way, he's in a swamp, and he is a bit lonely. He doesn't have much direction in his life, but then
Dom DeLuise.
an agent for Hollywood shows up and gives him an opportunity for an audition, and he takes it with both hands. He really wants it's actually a really good goal, actually. He doesn't just want it to be famous and rich, even though that's clearly a part of it, but he also seems to like the idea of just entertaining people and making people's lives better. And so that's his dream, to go to Hollywood and make people's lives better and be rich and famous. So he goes on a big road trip, and along the way he meets a lot of friends, a lot of other Muppets that will eventually turn into the Muppet family. He has to escape from the clutches of a guy who wants him to do advertising for Frog Legs, a restaurant chain in wherever he is. That's basically the movie, actually. It's just him on a road trip trying to get to one destination, which is Hollywood, and the little travails and adventures he has along the way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So, again, this film starts with the Muppets watching the premiere screening of their recently produced film, The Muppet Movie, then leads into this broad, sweeping helicopter shot, flying through the sky, coming through the clouds, moving into the swamp, as the banjo starts to play and Kermit the Frog sings this little song called The Rainbow Connection. Why are there so many... This was part of the connection as well, as, hey, somewhere over the rainbow leading to, why are there so many songs about rainbows, and what's on the other side? Rainbows are visions, yet merely illusions, and rainbows have nothing to hide. So people say, if they choose to believe it. I know they're wrong. Wait and see. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. This happy little song which has become a bit of an anthem in later Muppet lore, of like this symbol of just the Muppets being about like this pure joy in life, and you don't want to overthink things. So let's overthink the fuck out of this song. For a start, this first verse has a contradiction in it. Rainbows are visions, and only illusions, and rainbows have nothing to hide. But if rainbows are an illusion, then they are all about distracting the viewer and hiding things. Why am I bringing this up? Okay, what is Kermit?
He's a frog.
What is Kermit?
He's a Muppet.
A marionette puppet.
Okay.
He is yes, that is what a Muppet is. Portmanteau of marionette and puppet. It's a hand puppet. It's a series of fabric, which you put your arm up inside the torso, leaving your hand inside the head. Your 4 fingers will be in the upper part of the head, and your thumb will be in the lower part of the lip, in order to operate and move around the head and move the mouth. The other limbs will be operated by either marionette strings or rods in order to do actions. Right? So, Kermit the Frog is a Muppet, right? But he's a frog. So where is Kermit the Frog?
He's in a swamp.
Yes, he's in a swamp.
Okay.
Where is he in the swamp?
He's on a lily pad.
It's a log, but...
It's a log, okay,
yes.
fair enough.
Yeah, he's on a log. So, Kermit the Frog is on a log. Can you see what I'm getting at here? Okay. So, if you think, say, we're going to shoot a movie with a puppet on a log, you would think like, hey man, it's like a log in the middle of a swamp, so like you do like a green screen, or a rear screen projection or something, and the first few shots as it starts to zoom in from the distance into Kermit, who's sitting at the left edge of the frame with the log being on the edge of the frame. Then as we start to zoom in more and more and more, we see, hey, Kermit the Frog's on this log, and we can see down below him, in front of him, there's all this water of the swamp. Then in the second half of the song, the camera switches to cuts, and you start to see, like, there's none of the blur that a 70s blue screen would have had to indicate that it's a blue screen effect. And you can see that there's genuine rippling water behind him, which isn't something that you can achieve with mirrors or a rear screen projection. Do you see what I'm getting at now, Matt?
Kind of. I remember thinking that myself. I wasn't only thinking it thematically, I was just thinking, like, wow, this is a very technical
So, yes, so Kermit the Frog, a puppet, is on the middle of a log, a real log, in the middle of a real swamp, surrounded by water. No strings visible.
Yeah.
holy shit. How did they do this? Kermit the Frog is singing this song, which on the surface appears to be about, like, the wonder of magic and things, yet has these contradictions inside. He is sitting on this log because directly underneath him, Jim Henson is in a diving bell with his hand raised above his body to operate this puppet for up to 3 hours at a time in a scene that took 5 days to shoot.
Wow.
Kermit the Frog is singing a song about how he's a carny, and he knows it, and the more you work out his carny tricks, the more you'll be impressed by his skill.
Wow, we really can't get away from carnies in this.
Oh no, like, I think part of the beauty of this film is that there's this framing device that the Muppets are seeing the Muppet movie, which means that this isn't a movie that's the origin story for the Muppets in canon. This is the Muppets, the carny promoters who run a vaudeville TV show, constructing their own mythos and selling it to you. That's fucking bold. And that's what I really want to get to here as part of what makes the Jim Henson work with the Muppets so impressive. Is there's this courage and this lack of fear. He's willing to just throw things out there. He's willing to do this meta text where he's poking fun at his own tricks, at the same time being so damn good at these tricks that you'll be all the more impressed by how good he is. And I think that later, part of the problem of modern Muppet metatext is that it focuses on that surface level of the Rainbow Connection of this exciting, just dream, but not on the ways that he's willing to play around and be a bit cynical. And that's really, I think, some of the jokes that you were really blown away by when watching this is, like, the Muppets are willing to just throw some penguins in the air or have an explosion. They're also willing to really drop the bar. It's like, turn left at the next fork, and there'll literally be a fork sitting in the road, just like an eating utensil. Or, the drinks are on the house, everyone leaves the bar, while they're leaving the bar, to go on top of the house where they think the drinks are. But at the same time, there's these moments where Kermit the Frog, this mild-mannered character, cynically buries everyone around him.
Oh, that thing with the guy who looks like a rooster. What's his name? Gonzo. That was amazing. I don't know if anyone else finds it as funny as I do, but it's just like, because in the middle of, like, okay, I should probably explain even at least a little bit. Like, it's at the lowest point in the film where they can't get to the Hollywood place because they have no means of transportation, and Kermit's like having like a moment to himself to like just like ask himself why he's doing what he's doing, and what was the point of all this. And in the middle of that, like, and it's usually like a heroic kind of speech to like gear someone up, and it kind of was that. It still managed to be that, but right in the middle of it, he's just like, and then I met all these friends. I met a pig, met a chicken, whatever the hell Gonzo is.
Yeah, what is he?
I don't know what he is. He's kind of like a rooster, but not really.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a good example of later Muppet movies. There is an entire Muppet movie from 1999 featuring a cameo by Hulk Hogan called Muppets from Space, and it's entirely about what is Gonzo. That's lame. That's taking a joke too far. What is just... Like, you're talking about all your nice friends, and then you just bury them the second they're not looking at you like this. Kermit's willing to do this. Like, he is projecting the character of this mild-mannered nice guy. And there's certainly the way that his relationship with Miss Piggy is. You feel it can easily seem like it's Miss Piggy always forcing herself on him, but no. Like, I think the way that they introduce Kermit's interest in Miss Piggy in this film is really interesting. As you see... It's this beauty pageant, and then the punchline is Miss Piggy wins the human women beauty pageant. And a bit later, you see Miss Piggy catch Kermit's eyes, and then she's so enamored with him at first glance that she immediately imagines a full-on Victorian-era romance. But before that, when she first appears, like, Fozzie and Gonzo are both trying to talk to Kermit, and he just does this really subtle, not now. And it's just, he's horny for her. but it's so understated that you can just leave. And that's the way, like, there's these little glimpses of Kermit the Frog, the businessman, and the promoter that are hidden by this veneer of being the mild-mannered everyman that it makes him so endearing. But there's these little hints of darkness to Henson's characters in this era.
Well, it's that, it's such a simple point to make, but it doesn't mean it isn't true. Like, it's that little bit of cynicism can give an edge to something, and it also makes it more real. And I think the key there is that, like, you can talk about how fun or exciting or engaging or even just straight up really funny, like that bit of evil, not really evil, but like a little like cynicism.
A shade of darkness.
Shade of darkness can be, but I think what actually is more important, or at least just as important, is the fact that it actually makes the more uplifting and wholesome parts more real.
Yes.
Because it means that, yes, Kermit isn't an ideal. He isn't some kind of god being or angelic kind of creature. He is just a person, and that includes good and bad. And the fact that he chooses most of the time to... He
chooses to keep it clean.
Yeah. And it means all the characters as well. Like, that's why it is so wholesome, because the actual characters, like, not real characters, but like characters that have that kind of element of realness to them. And that means you want to see them succeed, and it means that when they are likable, you really do root for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's part of the beauty of Jim Henson's Muppets. Yeah. Is there is this slight edge, but it's people choosing to take the high road in their comedy, but also knowing how to turn it down a notch, but also turning it down a notch in ways which are, in their own way, wholesome. Like, it'll turn it down by then just leading to a bad pun, or quietly burying people without specifically attacking their identity. It's like, I think those sorts of moments, and a part of why I'm fixating on it so much, is when people are bad at comedy, and they just opt for whining about minorities, essentially, and then if you criticize them for it, it's, oh, what are you, some sort of wuss or coward? You're a snowflake, you don't know how... Why can't we tell jokes anymore? Political correctness has gone mad. It's no. You can have a dark edge to your comedy, but you can do it in a way which uplifts people.
Mm. This was such a good movie.
Yeah. Let's bring up something else that's great about this movie. Early on, Fozzie and Kermit arrive at a church, which pays off yet another... There's these jokes about losing your way, we'll look for a Hare Krishna. And then they finally find a church which claims to have a Reverend Hare Krishna preaching at it. Then it's just been taken over by some hippies who play some prog rock. But what's great about this is they start to tell them, well, the rockers ask, well, how did you get here? And they start to tell their story, and Kermit says, no, it's boring. Like, the audience has seen that already. We don't need to recount that here. You know what? Just give him a copy of the screenplay, then they'll know. And Matt lost his mind there. And, like, I presume you were expecting it to just never be brought up again.
Oh, yeah,
like,
that was a one-off joke to me.
Yeah, just this great one-off gag. The way that the second act lowest point is resolved is the band appears with their bus. How did you know we were here? We're in the middle of the desert. We're near Death Valley. Oh, we read the script.
I'm amazed that... I would love to hear why you think the movies had to pull this off, because I've seen so movies, or just anything, it doesn't have to be a movie, but I've seen so many stories try and do this kind of meta kind of jokes and stuff like that. It never works out. It's always really, really just...
Oh, Ryan Reynolds saying, hey, I'm making a fourth wall break within a fourth wall break. That's 16 fourth wall breaks.
Yeah, stuff like that. But it works so well here, and it's just so funny.
It's so... Because it's so rare. There's like 3 fourth wall jokes in the entire thing, excluding the bookends. And that bit in the middle where the film gets physically damaged. And every time no one sells for it, they just throw that out there and move on straight away. There's a few other jokes like this as well. I'm trying to think of one of the other ones that really set you off, where it'll throw a joke out there and it won't always have characters sell for it, and it won't have a comedy beat after it. It'll just throw some line out there and then move on. And so you're thinking and processing the scene and you go, wait a minute, did they just do that?
Yeah. Oh, the driver's license kind of scene. There was like a correspondence course. It was like, where did you learn to drive? It's like, I took a correspondence course.
Yes.
And then they don't say anything after that. They just keep on going. And it's,
there's no acknowledgement by Kermit or anything. It switches to a wide-angle shot of a car then backing into the church. It's just, how'd you learn to drive? A correspondence course. We're at the church now.
I guess it is that thing where...
And it doesn't... And it's not like it uses that sort of corpsing of its own jokes.
Just lets it
for
breathe.
that specific type of joke.
Yeah.
It will do that same sort of delivery for, like, really low-hanging fruit bad puns. Like, it does a similar sort of thing where Gonzo is a flight with some balloons, and Kermit's trying to give directions to Fozzie to try and drive the car to catch him. And for the same sort of delivery, you have Kermit saying, okay, you need to bear left. And Fozzie responds with frog right. And it just cuts away without that comedy beat again, just to resume the action. So it's just... Did they really just make a pun that bad?
They sure did.
And it was all in the service of a scene which is setting up a pie-in-the-face gag, which is one of the greatest pie-in-the-face gags of all time, because it's a billboard-sized pie, which has no reason to physically be a cream pie.
It doesn't matter, though. It works. It's funny. I think it shows as well, like, I'm kind of reminded of The Simpsons a little bit, like especially early Simpsons seasons. I think probably that cynical edge while also having a wholesome core to it. I think is probably why I'm reminded.
Yeah, like season 3 style.
Yeah, and that's something that I really grab onto. And I think as well with The Simpsons as well, it's like, why does Simpsons work? And as well, you can look at all these reasons why you can like try and pick it apart but you often just end up going like, look, there's a writer's room here that is full of just really talented people who are really good at telling jokes. And I feel like with Muppets, like where I was trying to ask you, why does this work? And it's like, in some ways, it's like, well, these people clearly are just very, very good at what they're doing. And I think it shows in that there's many different types of jokes in this movie. Mm-hmm. And they all just work perfectly. They just seem to know exactly what to do for each particular scene.
Yeah, I guess the broadest way to break that down is that humor is a positive violation of norms. And there's so many norms being violated here. There's these sorts of cultural ones. There's these structural jokes about film, these structural jokes about broader narrative. And so it's finding... They've just worked out so many ways to identify what someone thinks is normal about how you would script a scene, and then find a way to make that abnormal.
Yeah.
And they find a different thing that you would think normal each time to tear apart.
Yeah, and it keeps it fresh. Because like if it was just those bad puns throughout the whole movie, it would start to wear thin.
Yeah.
Or any other type of joke that it does would start to wear thin, but it just keeps mixing it up, keeping it fresh.
Yeah, you mentioned Airplane while we were watching this as well, and I think that's part of what makes Airplane so good, is that it also mixes things up. And is also willing to just grab that low-hanging pun fruit when it knows that will be the juiciest morsel.
Take pictures, boys. Alright, we're taking them down. Watch Airplane if you haven't watched Airplane. It's fun.
Yeah, we'll probably do Airplane at some point, just because I haven't seen it in a while.
Well, that's scary though, considering you want to have like a theme, because that's like a parody film. It's a chance you want to
Setzeberg time?
Oh, no.
I should get my hands closer to the mic there.
It was a bad idea. That was bad. I'll just watch Airplane myself. It's fine. And it shows, like, I think the ability to mix things up, like, that shows a skill in of itself, in that in order to be able to tell that many different types of jokes, you obviously have to be skilled and knowledgeable. And it just shows that I think I have a lot of love for the people who made this film, because it shows skill in so many different ways. Like you were talking about, for like technical skill and Carney skill. And we're also seeing like skills in being able to tell jokes. That's like screenwriting. That's also the in the moment by the actors. Like this whole film is just really good.
And the other thing that struck you while you were watching it is how good looking this film is. Not just in the ways that it uses sets. There's a fair amount of location shoots. Oh yeah, other bit of trivia. You thought it was shot in a Georgian swamp, that swamp scene?
Yeah.
That is the set for the lagoon from Gilligan's Island.
No, oh my god.
Yeah.
Tell me.
They imported a bunch of trees from Georgia, though, from memory.
Okay. Well, yeah, because the trees had that. There's like, they really did get me, because like it's hard to describe like in words, so I'll just be quick. Like there was a particular type of like vegetation that is only in Georgia, pretty much. It's like this little like thing that hangs off trees, basically. And I was like, I know what that is. It has to be in Georgia, but no, they imported it from. I got
You got carnied, mate. It's a work, brother.
It's the oldest trick in the book. I don't hate them for it though, because it just that looked fantastic, just like the whole movie did.
Yeah, and just the establishing landscape shots used throughout this film are tremendous, and the times of day a lot of them are chosen to be shot. There's so much great natural lighting in this film.
And you wouldn't have expected that. Like I would have been surprised if I wasn't laughing at any of this Muppet movie. I would have been surprised if there was nothing puppetry wise that didn't impress me. But I was not expecting to have just wonderful visual shots and just these scenic shots of mountains, of swamps, of like just roads with just wonderful scenery around them. And even like the on-location, like even in the buildings looks fantastic. Like the whole movie just looks so much better than I would have expected for a puppet movie, essentially.
Yeah, I think that's something we're going to see as we go along and look at some of the weaker Muppet movies, is that I think that they start to move away from that approach, and it winds up hurting them.
That'd be a real shame, because that was such a big part of why the movie was fantastic. Like, because you wouldn't expect to see the Muppets out and about in these kind of locations, and I think there's a magic to that.
Oh yeah, especially when they're moving autonomously, riding a bike and the like. Which is the scene immediately after this frickin' swamp scene.
I was like, how
is he on a log in the middle of water as a puppet? How was he operating a bike by himself? I think that one was mostly string-based.
That was my thought, but I was like, I was unsure whether I was being dumb. I'm glad that you're bringing it up as like technical feats, because I was like, am I dumb for thinking this is amazing? Or like,
no. Like, this is something Jim Henson was very big on working out, and part of why he's such a significant contributor to puppetry is he was almost fixated on how can I shock the audience next by just doing something that should be physically impossible. Just really get that movie magic going.
It looks impossible that Kermit is on this bike. It's just a scene of him going like down a road on a bike, and it's amazing. I was like in awe about it, and I didn't want to let on that I was in such awe, because I wasn't sure if it was like you were gonna like, I was like, what are you talking about? It's like a simple trick, but like no. I was like, wow, this is amazing.
Yeah, movie magic.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't have too much to say about this movie, just because I ended up just enjoying it moment to moment. Like that's
it's cool.
I didn't write too much down. I guess.
Don't worry, Matt. We're at an hour and 8 minutes.
I did have one thing. Just in especially because we were talking about two movies here, and it's good to try and compare something.
Yes.
I think that I really like the message of this film more than the message that maybe message isn't correct, but just like the way that we talked about how in Wizard of Oz it's all about realizing how great home is. And she's literally in the movie, she's like, I'm never going to leave home ever again. I'm going to stay right here. And if I don't feel good at home, then that's on me. And I should feel good at home. Like, that's essentially what she was saying.
Yep.
And with the Muppet movie, though, it's like, it was about making yourself better and about actually going on a journey. And it really, like, made that as something to really aspire to. And I felt that was such a better message in trying to make your life better, to make friends, and to explore the world.
The story that they've made is a completely false one, but the ultimate idea behind it is there is even the false things can be used to uplift and enrich in people's lives. So that's where I think that's ultimately like the thesis statement of the Muppets that's being made by this film is it's all bullshit, but we can enrich in lives with bullshit.
I don't want you to take this the wrong way, but I feel like that is actually something you would really enjoy. Like, the idea of like...
Yes.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to point that out, because as much as I was surprised at how much I wasn't... I wouldn't say I enjoyed Wizard of Oz that much, but I didn't hate it. It was enjoyable enough, but that final message did kind of undercut it for me a little.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that would be shared by others. Like, it just felt like, and it maybe is a bit too cynical, but like, especially from 1939.
Well, that's fine, because you're not a child.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, because like, especially because it's like 19, was it 39? Did you say it was? Yeah, it's like and the fact that it was a lady protagonist as well, and it's like, I gotta go to my back home. I wonder if they would do that with a male one. Like, I feel like if it was a male protagonist back then, they would have been like, yeah, go on an adventure and go do your thing, you know? But with no, Dorothy has to go back home. She doesn't get to enjoy herself or spread herself out and explore the world. And
Girls can't be the hero.
yeah,
They can't. They can't find that their home is no longer their home now.
yeah, like that monument.
They've got dinner to make.
Yeah, and I didn't know if that was too cynical, but it was something that stuck.
No, it's fine, and that can. I mean, from memory, that is a part of a feminist critique of Joseph Campbell's work.
Fair enough. But the Muppets did it so much better. So
anyway, so yeah, the Muppets, they're a lot. Thanks for watching.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Oh, sweet, we're going to actually end on that note.
Oh,
Rad.
are we? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that's what you. I thought you.
No, I was just going to see how you're going to react there. I'm fine with cutting it off there. I'm going to hit stop right now in the middle.